My name is Brian Shea. I'm an architect, and I am a technical consultant. My firm's Shea Consulting. We do architecture and Salesforce advisory work. All right, so agenda for today. I will be going through talking about AI security and compliance, why it's important, why it's a top concern. I'll be talking about 5 attributes of secure and compliant agents, and I will be talking about how to avoid non-compliant agents. All right, we need to do AI now. If I can summarize client conversations from 24 and 25, it is that statement right there. I talk with CIOs, exec level folks, and there is surely is a hunger to get moving with AI. I'm sure you all have experienced that as well. As soon as they say that, the next thing they say is, but no surprises, okay? It needs to work the way we intend it to. It needs to be secure. It needs to work the way we expect. And just to define terms that I'll be talking about today, security, compliance. Security is making sure that the right parties have access to the right data that we intend them to have access to. And compliance is making sure that our AI works the way that we expect it to. So both security and compliance, the key word here is expectations. It's about defining our expectations and making sure that it securely and compliantly works in terms of those expectations. How many folks were at the keynote this morning? So about half. One of the themes for me that came through loud and clear that I want to drill into a little bit here is this concept of non-deterministic functions, the idea that something works in a way that isn't one input equals one output, but there's a whole range of ways that it can operate. So when we're talking about expectations, we have a paradigm shift here. Okay, we're not working in the same type of environment where we can define exactly how it is going to work. So a lot of this presentation is going to focus on how we can define expectations and configure within this non-deterministic paradigm that we have with AI agents. All right, so 5 attributes of an agent. This is obviously a Salesforce slide. Salesforce has put together this framework of 5 attributes of agents: role, data, actions, guardrails, and channels. And I think from my work building agents, I think this framework, these 5 dimensions, is a really good way to think about expectations for secure and compliant agents. So role is, when we're talking about our agent, what job should it do? High level, what is the purpose of this agent? 2, what data does the agent have access to? And again, calling back to the keynote this morning, we're not just talking about CRM data, we're talking about unstructured data like knowledge articles as well. Actions, what capabilities does the agent have? Guardrails, what should it not do? So if we think about actions and guardrails, it's 2 sides of the same coin. What should it do and what should it not do? In channel, where is this agent going to exist? Where is it going to show up? And even more importantly, particularly for our purposes today, this concept of channel, I want us to think about not just where it shows up, but who has access to it. Okay? And really, if we look at this slide, role and channel, what does it do and who has access to it, is really going to drive our business requirements and our expectations around what data the agent has access to, what actions it should be allowed to perform, and what actions it shouldn't be allowed to perform and will need to guardrail against. Awesome. So there's a lot of questions that go within each of those 5 categories, but rather than sort of list off questions, what I'm going to do is use a very simple example, which is a simple service agent, to kind of unpack those 5 dimensions, the kinds of questions you're going to be asking, and then also like the level of detail you want to get into defining each of those things. It's important to have sort of the right, we don't want to be too high level and we don't want to be too exhaustively detail oriented. So hopefully you'll get a sense of like what level of detail is valuable in terms of defining your agents. All right, so role. Again, high level, we're talking about a simple service agent here. This service agent is designed to be partner facing. So let's say we have a company, we've got sales partners, and it answers questions for the partners, and it can create cases. So answers questions based on knowledge articles and creates cases. Channels. So this agent would be available on Experience Cloud sites. Login required, so it's a closed community. It's not publicly available. Important point here, it's available only to partners who have gone through our partner support team. So it's not like somebody can just come off the web and register. And all partners have received training and signed an agreement that they agree to the terms of use. So here, when we're thinking about it, we don't have a totally internal population here, but it's not public either. So that really drives like what level of comfort we have exposing data, exposing actions, and what do we need to guard against. All right, so data, and this is where I want you to start to kind of pay attention to level of detail that we want to get to when we're defining our agents. So first, I mentioned this agent is going to answer questions. It has access to knowledge. It doesn't have access to all the knowledge in our knowledge base. It has access to two particular categories: product information and partner policies. Okay, so specific definition here. And then really important, what is the object level data that it has access to? What is at an object level, create, read, update, and then at a field level, what access does it have? So really important to get to this level. I've seen agents built where it's just wide open and it's got access to a whole bunch of objects. You really want to nail that down and be clear about that. All right, so actions. Again, we're answering questions and we're creating cases. So around knowledge, we want this agent to have the ability to share and summarize policies reflected in the knowledge base around the partner program and commissions and around products. Okay, so I'm going to come back to this in a minute, but I want you to kind of remember the capability that we're giving it here is to share and summarize policies. Okay, we are not, I'll talk about this in a minute, but we are not giving it the ability to apply those policies to particular partners. Okay, or to interpret those policies. We're giving it the capabilities to share and summarize policies only. All right, so create case. This agent will have the capability to create cases. Again, I want you to focus on the level of detail here. We're defining the inputs, we're defining the outputs. In terms of inputs, description, contact, subject, priority, owner, and status. And for each of these inputs, we are defining where we're expecting that data to come from. Okay, so our user provides the description. So somebody who's using the chat identifies what the description of the case is going to be. The user provides an email or other identifying information, and the agent looks up the particular contact. The subject, the agent is going to summarize the subject or create a subject, generate a subject based on the description. Okay, so based on a 3-4 sentence description, our agent is going to create like an 8-sentence summary to be used as the subject. Priority, agent populates the priority based on a rubric. So I didn't write it out here, but in this agent example, we're going to set it as high priority if it's a product defect issue. And what the agent would do is it would look at the description and it would say, is this about a product defect? Yes, set it as high. If not, set it as medium. Owner will be the partner support queue, and the status will be new. Those are both constants. Once this is generated, the agent displays a case number of the case. So again, defining inputs, defining outputs, defining the specific fields. And I want to call this out here. When we're talking about input types, there's a few different kind of things that I want you to keep in mind. And I called it out here in the inputs. Input types can be provided by a user. They can be a constant. They can be a piece of information that the agent looks up. So I've got an email address, I look up a contact. Or it can be generated by the agent, like with the priority. looks at the description, it determines the content of the description, it sets priority based on that, based on rules or guidelines that we give it. I should also say here that for the purposes of this presentation, we've got a simple example, okay? This is, creating a case. As we get more advanced, and this presentation won't go into it, but as we get more advanced, we can have actions where inputs from one action outputs from one action are the input to another action. That gets more complicated in terms of setting expectations. It gets more complicated in terms of testing and defining what is accurate and correct. But this is a good starting place, particularly if you're starting out building agents. It's good to start simple and start with our inputs and our outputs. All right, so guardrails, answering questions with knowledge. As I mentioned, we're doing product and we're doing partner-related questions. I'm not going to go through all these. I wrote a bunch of guardrails out on this. I'll give you a few of them just so you get a taste. A pretty standard one, you must base your answers based on content provided in the knowledge base. We don't want our agent making up answers based on things outside of the knowledge base. Do not interpret policies or apply them to a particular partner. Do not give an estimate or a calculation about commissions. I know this one from experience. Took the ride, got the t-shirt. I had a client who wanted us to summarize policies in the knowledge base. And some of those policies were about commissions, sales commissions for partners. Okay, if I do a sale like this, what kind of a commission do I get? Their policy was that information came directly from their partner team, nowhere else. When we released the agent in beta, people started putting in, I've got a deal like this, I got this score, I got this, I got this, I got this. What's my commission? And the agent, based on the policies that we had in the information input, started giving estimates of commissions. Okay, they didn't want that. We figured that out through testing, and then we put guardrails in place that looked exactly like this. Do not give an estimate or a calculation based on commissions. So these are the kind of things when you're working with your business partners to define what your agent shouldn't do, you want to be really clear and specific about those things. Same idea, do not give a prediction about partners, forward-looking partner tiers. If you encounter conflicting information in the knowledge base, do not answer the question. I'll talk about this more later. And last, if you are unable to answer a question, ask if they would like to create a case. So if the agent isn't able to perform the task or answer the question, you want to put in there what you expect it to do. All right, so more guardrails. These guardrails are on create case. The user must provide the email in the description. If the user doesn't, prompt them to provide that. Do not show any information about existing cases. The only information you display will be the case number when you create a case record. Do not update existing records. Do not display aggregated data. So we don't want to give this agent the ability to somebody type in how many open cases are there. We don't want to give that agent that information, so we're not going to allow it to aggregate data. And just a few tips here. Really valuable, work with your business partners to kind of brainstorm their things that should be out of scope. You could ask them, like, what are your nightmare scenarios for this agent? And once you start the brainstorm, you'll get a lot of good things that you should guard against. And once you put those guardrails in place, also consider what the agent should do if it hits one of those guardrails and encounters something that is out of scope. So we've kind of defined at a high level those five different dimensions of a secure and compliant agent. There's other artifacts that I'm not going to go into detail on, but as you design and build your agents, you should be creating these artifacts as well. Process diagrams can be really valuable here. What are the process steps? What's the criteria for each step? Data dictionary, what's your business definition of your data and who should have access to it and at what level? Read, write, etc. Test cases. This one is again, calling back to the keynote, I think in our non-deterministic world that we are going to be inhabiting soon, or are inhabiting now, testing is going to become even more important. Okay, so defining our positive use cases, our negative use cases. I had mentioned as we get more, get into more complicated agents, it's not just one action, but it will be actions that will be providing information to other actions that will be providing information to other actions. Considering those and testing those will be important. And as I mentioned, it's non-deterministic. So it's not something where we can just do one test case, see that it passes and move on. We have to do this at scale, as they talked about this morning. All right, so step 2, configuring the agent. We've talked so far about how we define our expectations for it. I'm going to go through at a high level how to configure these criteria that we talked about. One point to call out here is this technology is changing really fast. In fact, there were things in the keynote this morning that are not in this presentation that had I known, I would have put them in this presentation. So it's all to say, as you are working on agents, as you are building stuff, focus on the principles and then how you can apply those principles for the particular tools that are available, because this technology is changing really, really fast. So you've seen this diagram before. The piece I want to call out here is we've got our Agentforce platform. We've got our Salesforce platform that you all are familiar with, the Salesforce security model, the Salesforce automation tools like Flow, Apex, etc. And you'll see here as we go through the configuration that these tools are going to be kind of interplay between the two of them. I should also say Data Cloud, Customer 360, they're not relevant for what we're talking about here today, but when you bring those into play, obviously there's even more interplay that's happening. All right, so configuration, there's 4 kind of levers that we're going to be talking about here that you can pull to kind of implement that definition that I talked about in the first half. So the 4 are, number 1, the Salesforce security model. Number 2, agent actions. Number 3, natural language instructions. And 4, data and knowledge quality. So first up, the Salesforce security model. As I mentioned a couple of slides ago, we're using the Salesforce platform. This is all built on the platform. As Salesforce admins, we're all familiar with the security model of users, profiles, roles, permission sets. Agents implement the user security model that you are familiar with. So an agent has a user that is associated with. It has a profile. It looks exactly like when you set up a user. So that's good news for folks that have deep experience like you all do with Salesforce, because that security model that you're familiar with maps directly over into the Agentforce world. All right, so agent actions. This slide is sort of packed with information. I could probably do a whole session just on this one slide, but I'm going to go through this and kind of give you some concepts to run with. So first, there's different kinds of actions. There's standard actions. There's custom actions. There's 4 different types of custom actions now: Flow, Apex, Prompt Template, and API. Okay. When I went through the slide earlier on actions, I talked a lot about inputs and outputs. Okay. So regardless of the type of action that you are implementing, they all have definition around what is the input to this action and what is the output to this action, okay? And for each of the inputs, we're defining whether it's required or not required, and we're defining whether we collect that information directly from a user or not. So again, going back to that definition phase, we were really thoughtful about the inputs and the outputs. Where do they come from? How do we get them? That maps directly over into your agent action definitions when you configure them. We also have the capability to use instructions, oftentimes at the topic level, to validate our inputs. So as I mentioned before in my example, there's 2 inputs required for this create case action, and we would create natural language to validate that the user has provided that information. Okay, so we use natural language to validate the inputs. As I mentioned, as we get more complex, there's going to be an interplay of actions providing data and information to other actions. Particularly when we start, we want to be really narrow in terms of the capabilities that we give our agents. Okay, so in our example here, the only action that this agent should be able to perform in terms of CRUD operations, create, read, update, and delete. The only CRUD operation it should be able to perform is create cases, I'm sorry. So there's an action, there's a standard action in Agentforce called create case, and there's also a standard action in Agentforce called create record. Create record allows you to create cases, contacts, accounts. For our purposes, we're going to use create case because that's all we want it to do, at least for version 1. So again, important to be, we've defined exactly what it should do, and when we configure it, we want to align our configuration just with the capabilities that we've defined in the first step. And on a similar note, we want to be intentional about the actions that we provide in terms of create, update, get. We want to be targeted and not just throw a whole bunch of standard actions at an agent because the results could be that it has the capability to do something that we hadn't intended it to. All right, so natural language instructions, I talked about these a little bit before. Natural language instructions do a lot of the heavy lifting around guardrails. So I had mentioned before about my unfortunate beta testing situation with the estimates. I had unintentionally built an estimate calculator or a commission calculator. These guardrails, natural language guardrails that we put in place sort of guarded that from not happening. And these particular guardrails are at the topic level. And then as I mentioned before, we can use natural language to validate user inputs and to format outputs. So again, you must populate the following case fields when you create a case: context, subject, description, status, and priority. So this really, we're using natural language to define exactly what inputs this agent should have. All right, so aligning configuration. So I apologize, this is not as cool as the Salesforce branded infographics. I built this myself in Lucidchart, but it's important. We want to make sure we've got agent security, we've got agent actions, and we've got instructions, okay? And we want to make sure that we're thoughtful at each level and that there's alignment between what we're building. And what I mean by that is we want to look at the capabilities and the actions that our agent has, and we want to make sure that we're giving agents access to the data that aligns with those actions. We don't want to be giving a whole bunch of data access that the agent shouldn't be able to use for the actions that we're giving it. And also, similar note, instructions are really powerful. Natural language instructions are really powerful. They're great for building guardrails. But if there's data that the agent shouldn't have access to, we should be defining that at the agent security level. We should be restricting the agent from getting access to it. We shouldn't be putting like instructions that say like, don't let people see the social security number, but you're giving access to it at the data level, right? So it's sort of like in sort of to use an example that people are familiar with, you've got a page layout, you've got data level access. You don't restrict at the page layout level, you restrict at the security level. So similar idea here. All right, so in last one, data and knowledge quality. Everything else we were talking about prior to this is agent configuration. This is data quality, knowledge quality. So if we've got a bunch of duplicate data, it's going to be hard for our, it's going to be hard for our users to work, for starters, but it's going to be hard for our agent to work if we've got poor data quality. If our knowledge articles have inconsistent information or they're out of date, again, hard for the agent to perform the way that we want. I put here as an example, if we have a knowledge base and there's conflicting information in the knowledge base, that's a bad thing for the agent. If you remember when I was talking about guardrails, I put in sort of a safety guardrail that said if you encounter conflicting information, don't answer the question. That's a good guardrail to have in place. A better guardrail to have in place is to not have conflicting information. So we can solve that at the knowledge quality level. All right, catch-all agents are non-compliant agents. What I mean by catch-all agents is you create an agent, there's dozens of standard actions available. You create an agent, you load it up with all the actions without a clear definition of what you want it to do, and stuff happens. That is not how we want to build agents. We want to be thoughtful about it. We want to define it, and we want to only give it the actions that it needs. If you build catch-all agents, the bad things that could happen are, number one, breakage. As I mentioned, actions can use other actions. If an action is invoked that it doesn't have sufficient information to fulfill it, the agent, that transaction could break. We want to avoid that. So breakage is one thing. Unintended capabilities, this is the example of my agent that was the commission calculator, where I hadn't intended it to give the capability to interpret the knowledge base. So that is another. And then bad data. If we don't specify the data, the outputs of the data, or how the data should be created, we're going to get bad data. So we want to avoid all of these scenarios. We want to be thoughtful about our definitions and our configuration. All right, Einstein trust layer. So I've talked this whole time about security and compliance. I haven't talked about the Einstein trust layer. The reason why is everything that I've talked about prior, or so far, is really at the agent level, okay? Configuration of the agent, instructions for the agent, what data the agent has access to. Einstein trust layer is org-wide. It's at the org level, okay? And you're all familiar, I'm sure, with this slide, but what the Einstein trust layer does is it masks your data from going into a public large language model, okay? And so it's an important part of our security. There's a few different kinds of data masking that the Einstein trust layer performs. There's pattern-based and there's manual. Pattern-based is the AI looks at the context of a particular piece of data, the format of the data, where it sort of exists, and says, oh, that looks like a social security number, let's mask it, okay? That's pattern-based. Manual is basically defining particular categories of data that you want to mask and then putting fields into those categories. So I will walk you through this briefly. All of this is available, all these configurations are available under setup. So go to setup and then in the quick find, go to Einstein trust layer. So you can configure your pattern-based. On the screen here, there's a number of different attributes and you can either mask or unmask. Data masking by sensitivity level. So this is having categories like confidential, internal, mission critical, etc. And you can identify if you want to mask it or not mask it. And then at your object level or at your field level, you put your fields into a category. So on the previous slide, I had set, we're going to mask our restricted data. So if data sensitivity level is restricted, we're going to mask it. And then here we've put the email field into that category. So that email field, any situation that occurs, it would be masked from the large language model. And then a third, or I guess a second way to do manual masking is by compliance level. So this is like GDPR, HIPAA, PII, that kind of thing. All right, so wrapping up, a few key takeaways that I want to call out here. First is that the non-deterministic, the idea that we're in this non-deterministic system now is really a paradigm shift. It's really a change in terms of how we define things, how we define what good looks like or what acceptable looks like, and it will really impact how we test. Start small and iterate. In my example, I started really small, like it's something that reads a couple types of knowledge articles, answers questions, and creates cases. You want to start small, you want to build on success, and then you want to build from there. If you do something that is, even if you do it in a thoughtful way, if you build something that's too big, it's going to be very hard to test, particularly if it's your first time building agents. Guardrails, again, on the concept of non-deterministic, a non-deterministic system, it's important to be really thoughtful with your business partners about what the scenarios that you really want to avoid are, so you can put guardrails in place. So defining those are going to be even more important than they have been in the past. Okay, so data access. While agent actions are non-deterministic, agent security is deterministic. What does that mean? It means that we define exactly what data the agent has access to. That does not change. It is not open to interpretation. It is deterministic. So we want to be very clear and very sort of traditional in the sense of defining exactly what the agent should have access to and then configuring accordingly. And last, definitely not least, watch this space. I expect that industry standards are going to evolve and mature around how we design and test agents in sort of the non-deterministic way. As you saw this morning, there's a ton of new tooling and capabilities that Salesforce is working on, and that'll continue to help us in this space. A few action items. So number one, Testing Center. Definitely check that out. If you scan this QR code, there's a video, like 5 or 6 minute video that the admin relations team put out summarizing Testing Center. It is available in sandboxes, I understand, and as I mentioned, it's going to help us with that non-deterministic testing. I didn't overpower you with this slide before, but it's kind of a cheat sheet of the questions that you want to be asking when you define your agents. So it goes through the 5 dimensions that I mentioned: role, data, action, guardrails, and channels. It can be useful as kind of a cheat sheet when you're gathering requirements and talking with your business partners about your agents. A few more resources. I think, actually, quick show of hands, how many people have built agents either in a sandbox or a demo org, trial org? About half. Okay, so as with anything, at least for me, like, I have a hard time understanding or talking about a piece of technology if I'm not hands-on with it. So Salesforce has put out a ton of really good content and use cases that they built out for the Agentforce community tours. If you scan that QR code, it will tell you how to spin up a trial org and give you a ton of use cases to go through. I really encourage you, if you've done hands-on work with agents or if you haven't, to do that, because even if you have, I'm sure there's scenarios there and functionality that you haven't used. Elements.cloud is a ISV that you might be familiar with. They have done a ton of thoughtful work around what they call a process-driven approach to agents. It's basically like building out a UPN diagram of exactly what the agent should do and then how that translates into configuration. Scan that QR code for a great video that they put together on that. And then last but not least, I think there's new and potentially better functionality around this now, but there is a report that's available standard that allows you to monitor the results of agents, the inputs and the outputs. It's called the Gen AI REC report, REC, request and response, I guess. At the Salesforce developer group put together a good video on that. Again, there may be new tooling on that front, but that's a good one to check out. And that's all I got. Thank you very much. We've got 3 minutes and 44 seconds for Q&A. You got to go to the mic, though.
Thank you. Making headlines, as always. So given what you said before, what you've seen today from the presentations, from the keynote, that you would have included it in your talk, what specifically? Can you share?
Yeah, testing center. Like a lot of the things that I talk generically about around non-deterministic testing, meaning you have one utterance and there could be a whole range of outcomes from that. Salesforce has what looks like some great tooling in place to allow you to do that in a more systematic way. So testing center number one, and then it looked like from the keynote this morning there was functionality around monitoring. How do you better monitor the results? So I think, as I mentioned kind of at the end, I think testing and monitoring are going to be even more important than they are now. I'm talking to a testing evangelist, so you already know that it is important, but I think it's going to become even more important in the future. Where sometimes, unfortunately now, testing is kind of an afterthought, unfortunately. I don't think that's going to fly anymore. Anybody else? Christine Marshall, no?
He does this to me every time I come to one of his sessions. I haven't played around much with agents so far, and when you talk about starting small and then iterating, growing an agent, I feel like I'm behind with how many agents you can have, and in my mind goes back to things like flow and automations where we ended up with hundreds, if not thousands, of different automations by making them, little pieces.
Oh.
Is there a risk to that with agents as well?
Yes, absolutely. So that is a really good point, right? If we start small, what happens if we've got a whole bunch of little agents? I think a couple thoughts. I think the smallness of flows, having a bunch of small flows, and that being problematic, is a function of them being small, but it's also a function of them maybe being poorly designed. So not thinking about them in terms of like how could this scale in the future. So I think I'm not necessarily against the smallness as much as I am about how, like what's coming down, how do we design this in a good way so it's scalable, how do we design this in a way that it's maybe invocable from something else. It's less relevant to flows, but I think going through that framework of the 5 dimensions, I think helps to be thoughtful about it and avoid that cul-de-sac.
Thank you. And it's not a question, but my favorite session today. So good. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Awesome. Everyone, I appreciate it. Have a great rest of TDX.